Off the coast of Canada, a packed airliner crashes into the sea, and more than 200 families are touched by tragedy.
He was half of me. He made me who I was. That's gone. That one's gone, that part.
But this tragedy may turn out to be a defining moment for air safety. The painstaking work of the crash investigators could have major implications for the future of commercial air travel.
You have an airline industry that's facing a catastrophic problem that nobody wants to face up to.
Potentially dangerous wires buried in almost half of the passenger planes flying today. September 2nd, 1998, a humid, thunderous night at New York's JFK Airport. It's a day just like any other, and thousands of passengers are streaming through. Among those going through the departure gates is 33-year-old New York businessman Tom Hausman. Lenita Hausman has seen her husband off at Grand Central Station a short time before.
We kissed goodbye. I always was afraid of flying, and I told him to fly safe. And he said, I always do.
Tom Hausman was traveling on business to Geneva, Switzerland, and he was flying on Swiss Air Flight 111. Also booked on the flight was Ray Romano from Goldens Bridge, New York. Like Hausman, he was traveling to Geneva on business.
We never said goodbye. He was always coming back. I was with him for over 25 years. We were married for 18 years. It just got better every day.
Swiss Air Flight 111 left on time just before 8:20 p.m. It headed north towards Canada. There were 229 passengers and crew on board. And for almost an hour, it was just another uneventful flight as the passengers settled down to the usual diet of drinks and in-flight magazines. Then, 56 minutes after taking off, just over the U.S.-Canadian border, something began to go terribly wrong. The pilot signaled air traffic control that he was facing a serious problem, smoke inside the cockpit. The pilot was one of Swiss Air's most experienced. He requested an emergency landing in Boston. Then he was told to go to Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was closer. The plane was at high altitude and heavy with jet fuel, so the pilot circled away from Halifax to lose altitude and dump fuel over the sea. The plane then resumed course toward Halifax and an emergency landing. Then, disaster. Both pilots advised ground control of the need to land immediately. Seconds later, radio contact was lost. Then, the pilot lost control of the plane. 6 minutes must have seemed an eternity to those on board as Swiss Air Flight 111 spiraled out of control, plunging from 20,000 feet towards the dark seas of the Atlantic. Just 16 minutes after the first sign of trouble, Swiss Air Flight 111 disappeared from the radar screens. Flight 111 crashed into the sea 6 miles from Peggy's Cove on the coast of Nova Scotia. It was just minutes away from Halifax International Airport and safety. The rescue operation began immediately. Even local fishermen put to sea in a desperate search for survivors. But the signs weren't good. The awful crash had been heard by local people 6 miles away.
My girlfriend and I heard a really loud bang. It didn't sound like an explosion. It sounded like something hit on impact.
It wasn't even an explosion. It was almost like an air wave sort of hit the top of the house and the windows shook.
Even before dawn, the first bodies were brought ashore, and hopes of finding survivors seemed to be receding. As the hours wore on, rescuers became resigned to the fact that there was no one to save. All 229 passengers and crew were dead.
The chances of a survivor right now are poor, very poor.
This is important.
Daybreak in Nova Scotia revealed the awesome scale of the tragedy. The sea awash with the personal effects of Flight 111's 229 passengers and crew. It was clear to the crash investigators what their first priority was.
First of all, we got to find the aircraft. Once we found the aircraft, we're looking for the flight recorders. That's very important. That'll be the priority. Once we've got the flight recorders, we'll take them back and analyze them, get as much data out of them as possible.
According to the Canadian National Transportation Safety Board, the flight recorders had stopped working 6 minutes before the plane hit the sea. The answer now would lie in recovering as much of the plane and its contents as possible, a task that was as distressing as it was daunting.
One heartbreaking find was a love letter that someone had written on the plane for their loved one.
Makes you think how quick things can happen. And when you see small kids' shoes and baby bottles and things like that. So it's not very nice.
Peggy's Cove has long been on the tourist map and popular with visitors to Nova Scotia. But now it found itself playing host to hundreds of relatives of Flight 111's passengers. From across the United States and the world, families and friends began arriving at Peggy's Cove. But the big question in their minds, how all of this had come to pass, had no immediate answer. That would now depend on the patient forensic skills of the Canadian crash investigators. Gathering the pathetic remains from the surface of the ocean now gave way to a much more difficult task. From the depths of the Atlantic, the Canadian Navy began the painstaking job of recovering as much of the plane as they could find. Now the investigators could begin their work, piecing together clues in their search for the cause of the disaster. Eventually, their efforts may prove to be a turning point in the history of commercial air safety.
This particular incident, the Swissair 111 matter, is in fact going to be a watershed event in the aviation industry.
Many experts now believe that a new and frightening theory is emerging from beneath the calm waters of Peggy's Cove. These are the only recognizable pieces of Swissair Flight 111 that have been lifted to the surface. Such was the force of the impact that the plane's giant steel engines were bent like cardboard. But the crash investigators are not even attempting to reconstruct the entire plane because most of it holds few clues to what happened during Flight 111's last desperate minutes. Most of it, after an initial examination, is effectively just being filed away, the larger pieces outside in the yard. The smaller pieces are kept in hundreds of cardboard boxes in another hangar built just to house them. The plane was reduced to over 1 million pieces by the crash. The investigators' early findings led them to concentrate on just the front 9 meters of the plane, the cockpit, the front galleys, and the bulkhead. Investigators found heat damage from the top of the galley down. This and other evidence led investigators to conclude that there was a fire raging in the ceiling area at the front of the plane. So the Canadians are trying to piece together the tiny fragments of metal and wire in this portion of the plane to find out exactly what happened. And if there had been a fire on board, then the next thing the investigators needed to find was a possible source for that fire.
One of the things you try to find is the origin of the fire. And what we need to do is find a source of ignition. So one of those sources of ignition energy we know can be electrical wiring. This is the size of wire that we're actually trying to find.
What they are looking for are wires which show evidence of electrical arcing or short circuits.
To date, we have found 13 wires that show arcing damage. The two I have just mentioned, I have a photograph here that shows 8 more of them. These 4 wires.
One of the top suspects is the wiring of the plane's brand new in-flight entertainment system, a system that has since been banned by the FAA. One possibility under investigation is that the entertainment wire overheated and damaged the main power supply wiring. Another possibility is that the entertainment wire in some way damaged the power supply cables by rubbing through the insulation coating. But whatever happened, the damage was devastating enough to take out a major part of Flight 111's electrical systems and bring the plane down. And there is the other big question. Could it happen again? Some believe that it could.
There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we are sitting on a powder keg, and the wiring in aircraft today is the greatest threat to continued safety of flight in the worldwide fleet today, and nobody is taking the bull by the horns to deal with it.
Wiring is emerging now as that #1 thing to be concerned about, and it may take 1 or 2 more crashes before we actually acknowledge that.
It took the crash of TWA 800 off Long Island in July 1996 to first highlight the problem. Faulty wiring in the center fuel tank of TWA 800, a Boeing 747, is suspected of triggering an explosion which brought down the plane. All 230 people on board were killed. The investigation into that crash prompted a series of safety directives from the Federal Aviation Administration. Wiring was suddenly an issue. Airlines were ordered to inspect wiring buried deep in the fuel tanks of other 747s. Many were found to have damaged insulation.
TWA 800 really began the process of elevating the consciousness of the public to certain areas that we've known about. When Swissair 111 happened, within a week, there was no doubt in my mind that we had a wiring accident.
Every large modern passenger jet contains 150 miles of wiring, the hidden blood vessels that carry power to the thousands of functions today's modern jets must perform. For years it was thought that wiring would last for the design life of the plane, but that view is beginning to change. Seattle, home of the Boeing Aircraft Company. 90% of the planes flying today come under its wing. Over the years, Boeing, like other plane makers, has used different types of electrical wire. Poly-X, which was in TWA 800, had replaced a PVC nylon insulation, but even Poly-X had its problems, and in the 1970s and 80s, it was itself replaced by another insulation, one which many in the industry believed was state-of-the-art. For over 20 years, until the early 90s, Boeing fitted its planes with wire wrapped in a new insulation. This insulation was called Kapton. Kapton was tough, flame-resistant, and very light, so it reduced the weight of the plane and saved on fuel. In short, Kapton was a plane maker's dream.
This is the standard Kapton wire that's used on airplanes. Look at the thinness of the material. The insulation on the outside of this wire is the thickness of 4 human hairs. You know? 4 of those things is all that protects you from the electricity.
As Bruning found, this remarkable insulation had one big drawback.
Kapton, in the presence of moisture, high temperature, and strain, will deteriorate to the point where it fractures.
Bruning's lab experiment shows what can happen to Kapton when it fractures and liquid gets into the crack.
When the fracture occurs, the electricity can leak through the crack and cause damage to the insulation and eventually cause a drastic arc.
When the wire short circuits, the Kapton coating is transformed. The heat turns it from an insulator into a conductor so that the arc can travel the wire. And it doesn't need liquid. The same explosive effect can occur if the wire chafes or rubs against something else, wears through to the conductor, and then short circuits. Doubts about Kapton's performance have been raised for some time. Boeing, however, does not believe that this wire has caused particular problems in passenger planes.
We haven't seen anything that we consider at this point in time anything that could be attributable to the wiring type, whether it's Kapton or any other wiring type at this point.
This airplane graveyard in Arizona is the last resting place for many older passenger planes which were fitted with Kapton wire. This is an old Lockheed L-1011, sometimes called a TriStar. The L-1011 was one of the very first passenger jumbos to be fitted with Kapton insulated wire back in the 1960s and 70s. But even then, some people were becoming very worried about Kapton. The first American airline to take the TriStar from Lockheed was TWA. Their man in charge of wiring was Bill Gasper. When TWA was buying its first L-1011s in the late 60s, Gasper took a close look at the plane's Kapton insulated wiring.
A very slight nick in the wire would, and if you bent it or vibrated in a certain way, the nick would propagate to the conductor, and the bare conductor was exposed.
Gasper decided to do some simple experiments in his kitchen.
I wrapped some of the wire around a 20-penny nail, slightly nicked it. Some of it I put into water that was warm to a temperature almost boiling, some of it into an oven. Upon doing that for a short period of time, in some cases a longer period in the oven, the nick opened up quite dramatically. I recommended that it not be used on the L-1011 aircraft.
According to Gasper, Lockheed didn't take his advice.
Lockheed's response was that we obviously have a difference of opinion between our two wiring experts, and we're going to do it our way and take our experts' recommendation.
So, TWA took delivery of its fleet of L-1011 TriStars from Lockheed, all fitted with Kapton wire. According to Gasper, the fleet began having problems with the wire. The first was in 1972.
Well, this was a wire bundle running under the floor below the aft lavatories on an L-1011. For some reason, that bundle had a catastrophic failure where the bundle exploded. It cut itself in two. I looked at it as a precursor of what was going to happen on Kapton installations in the future.
Gasper now turned detective and began his own investigation into Kapton's safety record. Soon he became aware of other fire events in the TriStar fleet, which he suspected were Kapton related. Some of them were potentially catastrophic. By 1978, TWA was ready to buy Boeing aircraft, but by now Boeing too was using Kapton. Gasper tried again to keep it out of TWA's fleet.
I wrote a letter to Boeing indicating that we strongly object to its use because Transworld was going to have future orders through Boeing, and we did not want the wire on any future aircraft.
The TWA letter was unequivocal. Because of Kapton's minus factors, we will strongly object to any proposed use of this wire on future TWA aircraft.
We took the letter and we asked our wiring experts to sit with the appropriate people in TWA, explain the characteristics of the wiring, which we did. And as a result of that, they reevaluated their position, and subsequently the Kapton continued.
Well, Boeing should have taken a step back. Rather than making more and more aircraft, they should have done an overall assessment to see, is this as bad as these operators claim?
Boeing had talk TWA out of their fears. Commercial airlines continued to purchase planes with Kapton wiring. But by the 1980s, concerns were growing in the military. The United States Navy had been having problems with in-flight fires and unexplained explosions in some of its aircraft. They decided to do some tests of their own. Their top wiring man then was Bob Dunham. His tests were even more dramatic than Bill Gasper's.
We took a wiring harness and we put aircraft power to it. Then we shot at it and it exploded.
Any wire struck by a bullet would suffer damage, but most wires would just break or short circuit. Only Kapton, when damaged by a bullet or by anything else, will explode with such devastating effect.
When this thing exploded, small balls of copper, because the wire is tin-plated copper, and at 5,000 degrees C it balls up and it explodes, actually hits some of the participants.
Dunham's team found out about another Kapton characteristic. When a wire short circuits in a plane, it trips circuit breakers which cut off the power to that wire. Normally, a pilot would reset them to see if power can be restored. But when this was done with the Kapton insulation, it exploded again.
This was the other thing that we demonstrated, that once you have a wire fire, an arc tracking in a demonstration, the circuit breakers pop. You reset that circuit breaker and it'll continue, it'll go again in increased intensity.
And as Dunham's people reset the tripped circuit breakers, they saw explosion after explosion, with the fire traveling along the wire harness towards the power supply. It only stopped when all power was cut off.
By resetting that circuit breaker, he's re-energizing that wire bundle, that system, and essentially creating an arc track event that can then melt down through succeeding bundles, knock out all his flight control systems, his navigation systems, etc., and bring down the aircraft.
Faced with such a threat, the U.S. Navy was ruthless in dealing with their Kapton problem. This is Davis-Monthan, a military plane graveyard in Arizona. In 1987, the order had gone out to eliminate Kapton-insulated wiring from the Navy's aircraft. Where possible in existing planes, Kapton was replaced with another insulation. The planes the Navy couldn't afford to rewire were simply put out to sand, here at Davis-Monthan, the final resting place for many of the Navy's Kapton-wired planes. And there was more. The Navy issued a complete ban on Kapton wiring in all of its future planes. Boeing now says the Navy's Kapton problem was a military problem and not one that civilian airliners would face.
The military application and the conditions that they operate in are far more severe than we would ever see, quite frankly, in terms of the type of atmosphere that they operate in and the temperature conditions.
But other experts believe that the differences are not that significant.
Our analysis indicates that the environment and the stresses may be more severe on commercial airlines than on military airlines. Military airlines only fly a few hundred hours a year. Commercial airlines fly thousands of hours a year. And every hour that you're in the air, the wire is shaking and vibrating, and so that the forces applied to wire can be, in fact, much greater than for a military aircraft.
In 1985, for the first time, an official report linked Kapton to events which almost brought down a civilian passenger plane. The plane was a Boeing 757, registered to Britain's Monarch Airlines. It was flying from the Canary Islands to England.
06,218,
The plane was flying over Portugal when there were two explosions and the cabin began to fill with smoke. Then the plane lost electrical power, and some of the flight systems failed. The pilot made an emergency landing in Portugal. The official report concluded that electrical failures were the result of a combination of conditions: damaged Kapton insulation under a leaking toilet drain.
There was some laboratory fluid that came down on a wire bundle, knocked out the EFIS, the flight control systems went totally blank. It could have caused the plane to crash.
There have been other serious incidents in civilian planes fitted with Kapton insulated wire. Incidents where electrical problems may have been directly related to Kapton, though not identified in official reports. Cases like these, all involving faulty wiring, but which have never been officially linked to Kapton. May 11, 1990, Manila, a Philippine Airlines 737. An explosion and fire destroyed the plane on the ground. 8 people died. March 17, 1991, Canada, a Delta Airlines TriStar. A serious in-flight fire in the passenger cabin forced the pilot to make an emergency landing. November 24, 1993, Copenhagen, a Scandinavian Airlines MD-87. A severe fire on landing burned through the fuselage. The plane was badly damaged. December 8, 1998, Lusaka, a British Airways 747. Fire broke out on the ground when wires arced beneath the passenger seat. Even though Kapton is potentially dangerous, the Monarch incident is one of the few commercial incidents that has been officially attributed to Kapton wiring. Why? Because investigators don't always know what they're looking for.
Okay, I'm getting smoke coming. Smoke in the cockpit. There's smoke.
In a flight simulator, a flight crew rehearses what to do if they have smoke in the cockpit of their plane.
Smoke in the cockpit, and we'd like to return to Gatwick as soon as possible.
They have strict procedures to go through, which are designed to isolate and eliminate the electrical fault, which could be causing the problem. Smoke is one of a pilot's worst nightmares, and they practice the drills thoroughly.
Maximum speed, 200%.
But if faulty wiring, and Kapton wire in particular, is so hazardous, why have we heard of so few Kapton disasters, or even near disasters?
If you don't look for something, you won't find it. And the way that data are being collected, even in commercial operations, how you designate a bringing down airplane under emergency conditions can be wire-related and never be seen.
The biggest difficulty has been that problems caused by defective wiring have often been listed in the statistics not as wiring faults, but as faults in the electrical component that the wiring powers.
If, for example, let's say that the autopilot fails and the airplane has to come down early. If it comes down, the reason the autopilot failed may well be a wiring problem, but it'll never be designated that way. It'll be called an autopilot failure.
This is one man who found out just how easy it is for wiring faults to be blamed on something else. Kevin Campbell's family was struck by tragedy a decade ago. They heard about it on the morning news.
The radio turns on automatically at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the first news item was that there'd been a problem with Flight 811. My wife just said, "It's Lee's," and basically we knew right then that he was gone.
Kevin Campbell's son, Lee, had been traveling on United Airlines Flight 811 from Honolulu. He was on his way home after a long business trip.
He just started a new job working for one of the wealthiest families in New Zealand, and he went over to Germany to the Frankfurt Fair, and he did so well over there that they let Lee do the American part of the journey.
Only a few miles out from Honolulu, the 747's cargo door opened, then tore away from the plane. 9 passengers were sucked out to their deaths. One of them was Lee Campbell.
You don't get much more horrific than falling out of an aircraft from 22,000 feet. You imagine it sitting there, and the next minute you're falling. He could have been alive,
and it's 4 minutes before you hit the ocean.
The Campbells traveled to Seattle to attend the official inquiry into the disaster. After a lengthy investigation, the official verdict was announced. The door had not been closed properly by the mechanic on the ground. But Campbell, himself a mechanic, was far from convinced. He believed that if it were possible to close the door improperly, it would happen more often.
Well, it didn't sound credible to us. We felt that if they could be mishandled, that these 747s would have been falling out of the sky left, right and centre.
Campbell already had his own suspicions. He believed that an electrical fault had sent a rogue signal to the cargo door, ordering it to open while the plane was in the air.
Well, listening to the hearings to us, it was obvious that it was an electrical problem that the plane had had. The overriding problem was an electrical one. I think it's easier to blame the guy that closes the door rather than admit that the plane and the wiring is faulty.
Flight 811 was wired not with Kapton, but with Poly-X wire. It was faulty Poly-X wire, which is now thought to have brought down TWA 800 off Long Island 4 years ago. Kevin Campbell and his wife believed that faulty wiring on Flight 811 had caused the rogue electrical signal which ordered the cargo door to open. They refused to accept the official explanation and campaigned for the investigation to continue. Then in 1991, the investigation was reopened and the U.S. Navy was asked to recover the door of Flight 811 from the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Eventually, they found it, and when it came up, the Campbell's suspicions were all borne out. The main door latch was closed as it should be. It had not been closed improperly.
When they recovered the door, they admitted to us that we were right. Everything was exactly as we had described that it would be, and they advised us that we were correct. They would make the repairs that were necessary to the aircraft. Just not hold your breath that the report is ever going to be changed.
But the official report was changed to conclude there was evidence that electrical arcing had been responsible. Kevin Campbell had made his point, and modifications have now been made to the 747 cargo door to prevent similar disasters. Flying is just a little bit safer for all of us, and it is still very safe. The odds of something serious happening to us are about 1 in 1.5 million.
United carried 568 million people safely, and Lee got on the plane and was killed. The odds are fine, but it does happen.
How many incidents have been caused by faulty wiring is not known, but we may finally be closer to solving the mystery surrounding one of the biggest aviation disasters of all, where over 300 people perished. In 1980, 301 people died in this inferno. This was Saudi Airways Flight 163. It was on a short flight from Riyadh to Jeddah. It became the 6th worst air disaster of all time. Only minutes out of Riyadh, smoke started to creep into the cabin. Passengers began to get alarmed. A fire had broken out in the cargo hold.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are requested to remain in your seats. I repeat, everybody remain in your seat and fasten your seatbelt.
The pilot decided to play safe and head back to Riyadh.
163. Go ahead, 163. 163, we're coming back to Riyadh.
But by now, the flames had spread into the passenger cabin. The pilot asked for fire crews to be ready on the ground. The plane made a routine emergency landing, but there was confusion amongst the crew about what to do when they landed.
20, 30, 20.
When they did land, the pilot inexplicably taxied on and on down the runway when he should have pulled up and stopped as soon as he could. And as he went on and on, the fire got worse and worse. When the fire crews got to the plane, they couldn't get the doors open. It was almost 20 minutes before they got inside the plane. And by then, everyone on board was dead. It started when a leak of hydraulic spray had been ignited, but at the time, investigators couldn't say for sure what had ignited the fire. And Flight 163, a Lockheed L-1011, was fitted with Kapton insulated wire. In 1980, the explosive properties of Kapton were pretty much unknown, but even then, the wire was under suspicion. Fire experts investigating the disaster traveled from London to meet a man who had been campaigning against Kapton being used in L-1011s, TWA's Bill Gasper.
Some individuals, one from Lloyd's of London and one from a British fire expert group, they called on me and visited me in Kansas City because they knew I had expressed concern about Kapton, and in discussing it with them over about a 2-hour period, I was under the impression that they thought that the cause of that Saudi fire was a Kapton wire conflagration. I have no doubt that it was a Kapton wire bundle fire.
Even so, despite mounting concern from experts that Kapton can pose a hazard, the plane manufacturers still insist it's safe as long as the wiring is inspected regularly and carefully according to each aircraft's own maintenance plan.
Anytime an aircraft is opened up for maintenance purposes, whether it's at a major check or a minor check or opening of a panel, part of the requirements for that maintenance plan is that you have to inspect the wires for both what we call security and condition. That means that you have to check the wires for chafing, for evidence of arcing, and security means whether or not they've been properly clamped or installed.
But how tough a job is it to inspect a plane's 150 miles of wiring as thoroughly as Boeing insists they must? Maintenance crews at one airline are really trying.
Stay Amarillo, tomorrow LA, let's ask you to fly, we're on our way. We fly so smooth through the clouds above, get to there safe because we do it for love.
Southwest Airlines in Dallas, Texas, and a video promotion to highlight the vibrant, no-frills young American airline. But behind the fun is an airline that enjoys a reputation among safety experts for taking wiring issues on its fleet very seriously indeed. But even safety-conscious Southwest recognizes the serious limitations on inspecting all the wiring.
The visual inspections that we're doing on the aircraft right now is basically what we have available to work with right now. There are other laboratory-type inspections that people are trying to develop now because of the new emphasis on aging wiring, but none of those are really usable in the field yet.
Most experts now agree wire deteriorates over time, so inspection becomes even more important as the wire ages. But is all the wire in a plane available for inspection?
I would say that a large proportion of the wiring is in fact accessible, and what happens is during a major check, which can occur over a period of years or regularly over a period of months, the aircraft is opened up and virtually all of the wiring is available for inspection.
But this view is not shared universally by engineers who have responsibility for keeping planes safe to fly.
There are portions of the aircraft where the wiring is almost totally inaccessible. And the reason for that is the wiring is built into each section of the aircraft as it is originally manufactured, and then the large sections of the aircraft are assembled. So completely rewiring the airplane or gaining access to every inch of every wire on the aircraft, practically once the airplane is assembled, is just not feasible.
Here inside the belly of a 737, wire bundles are undergoing a formal inspection. They're looking for age wear, tiny cracks in the insulation, evidence of previous charring. Some experts believe it's an impossible job.
75% of the ruptures in insulation are undetectable by superiorly trained, highly qualified visual inspectors. You're asking a man to use his naked eyes, usually an arm's length inspection, not a magnifying thing, to go down the cables near the places where they're disconnected before they go behind panels and inspect and find the occurrence of these fractures.
Some mechanic crawls into an aircraft, looks at a wire bundle from the exterior, really can't get into the inside of that bundle, and for the most part, can't even see most of the bundle as it travels through the plane. That's fabulous.
Some experts believe that as Kapton wire gets older, the problem gets worse. So what is the solution? Boeing stopped using the Kapton insulated wire in the early 1990s. McDonnell Douglas, which has since been taken over by Boeing, stopped at about the same time. One of the last planes they fitted with Kapton was the ill-fated Swissair 111. Now, in most of their planes, they're using the latest generation of aircraft wire, Kapton sandwiched between two layers of Teflon to protect it from damage. It's called TKT. Of the major manufacturers, only the European Airbus industry uses the original Kapton insulation, and then only in pressurized areas of their planes. They believe that Kapton is suitable here because of its low smoke emissions and toxicity in case of a fire. But the old Kapton wire still flies around the world in about 40% of the world's passenger planes. And there's no quick fix. Experts agree it would be cheaper to throw planes away and buy new ones than to attempt to rewire existing ones. Other solutions remain elusive.
Now they're faced with a huge problem. What do you do as the CEO of Boeing? Say, we're going to rewire these aircraft? You can't. We're going to give the airlines new airplanes? You can't. What are you going to do as an airline? Say, we're going to ground the fleet because we have this problem? You can't. What does the FAA do? Say, we're going to ground the fleet and put the aircraft manufacturers out of business so they come up with safe wires and safe inspection and maintenance procedures? They can't.
But with every day that the Canadian investigators into the Swissair tragedy go about their painstaking work, the day may be drawing nearer when the aircraft industry will have to face wire concerns head-on. Already, the Flight 111 investigation has prompted inspections of wiring in similar MD-11 aircraft. Several of the first planes inspected showed evidence of chafed, cracked, broken, and cut electrical wires. In fact, electrical systems aboard MD-11s have been the subject of more than a dozen airworthiness directives from the FAA in just 6 years. The Canadian investigation into the Swissair tragedy is likely to go on for at least another year. And until it's over, many questions will go unanswered. Still, some family members are already convinced. They are campaigning for the removal of all Kapton wiring from every passenger plane.
We have challenged very large companies, and that's a daunting task. We are faced with opposing unlimited resources, virtually unlimited resources. But we do believe that in the end, we will be able to accomplish a safer airline industry, and we will be able to prevent this tragedy from occurring again.
I went to turn on the 11 o'clock news, like I always do, and I saw a plane crash, and I saw the Swissair logo. It took me a while to go get the itinerary out because I knew it couldn't be possible, and everything matched. And when I started to shake is when I figured, I think this is real.
We turned the television on and watched CNN, and I remember sitting on the couch just rocking, thinking he's fine. He's young and he's resilient and he's athletic and he's fine. And about 2 hours later, all of a sudden something just passed over me. I can't quite explain, and I may never be able to explain, a sense of peace that just blanketed me. And I turned to my parents and I said, he's gone.
Someone else whose life was devastated that night was Jake LaMotta, Raging Bull, the former middleweight champion of the world.
I was at home at the time when my friend and attorney called me up and he said to me, Jake, I think your son just died on a plane crash.
Jake LaMotta's son, Joe, had been a passenger on Flight 111. It was the second son Jake had lost within a year.
And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, I took him to the airport I put them on the plane, and I just found out on TV that the plane crashed, and they think everybody died.
Lynn Romano, whose husband Ray died in the crash, is also determined it's not going to happen again. She's launched her own air safety campaign and is linking up with experts to get to the truth. It was, she believes, all so unnecessary.
He didn't have to die. None of them had to die. And when I went outside and saw them bringing the wreckage in, is when I figured something's not right here. You know, this can't be.
Just this fall, final conclusions about the crash of TWA Flight 800 over Long Island resulted in a sweeping proposal to address what the FAA describes as the fire triangle, the combined factors of ignition, fuel, and oxygen. Concerns about electrical arcing will come under increased scrutiny. Similar lessons from Swissair 111 could bring about major changes in wire regulation and perhaps make air travel safer for all.